welcome back to this setup. The last time we discussed books, it may seem like a short period to you, but it's been about 2 months for me. So since the last time I reviewed a book, I've read more books. Surprise, surprise. I think the last book I reviewed was a series of Sherlock Holmes. So after reading Sherlock Holmes, which means the first book that I will be reviewing this time is Jane Eyre. I read Jane Eyre and it was a time. I'm not a fan of Jane Austen or Bronte literature, but I did find Jane Eyre very interesting. It deals with a multitude of problems concerning social welfare, marriage, gotta have that incest, and the idea of who to help and who to not help and why. It's very interesting. I have a lot of issues with this book, mostly concerning the social relations, and I feel like that is either a product of the time or Bronte just hadn't met a lot of people in her life, which is very understandable. Either way, it was an interesting read. I would read it again, but the plot twist has kind of been spoiled for me, so I'm not sure if I would have the same reaction as I did. Although, to be fair, I kind of called that plot twist at the end. If you've read a lot of 1800s literature, you can kind of see where the story will go in the end, but it is still a fun read, and the way you get to the end is full of twists and turns, which is really, really interesting. I highly recommend giving it a read, but give it a read with a grain of salt, because it might be a little bit difficult to get through. I promise you it's kind of worth it in the end. I would give Jane Eyre 4 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. If you have read Catcher in the Rye, then you have a basic understanding of how The Bell Jar will go in terms of character development. In my mind, The Bell Jar is a female version of The Catcher in the Rye that expands on burnout and mental health. It was almost a little too real for me. It felt a little bit like Sylvia Plath had seen my own life. Of course, I did not go into an institution, nor did I get electroshock therapy, but I do know some people that electric shock therapy has helped, so I do see that aspect of it. It's kind of interesting to see how between the 70s, the 1970s, and the 2010s and 2020s, how much has changed and how much has stayed the same. I burned through this book. It took me 3 days to read. I loved every second of it. Sometimes I had to put it down because it got a little bit too close to home. I did cry. I appreciate the way that these issues were handled, and I think it was handled so well because Sylvia Plath herself dealt with a lot of mental health issues. So I highly recommend this. I give The Bell Jar 4.5 stars out of 5. I don't like giving out 5s. And the final book on this go-around is Oliver Twist by Charles Dickens. I love Dickens. I think his writing is very interesting. I think his writing is very approachable. I know others would argue against that. But for the time period, Charles Dickens has the most approachable writing to get yourself into writing from that period, I think. Oliver Twist is about a boy, an orphan boy, who grows up in England in the 1800s. Because he is an orphan, he is considered destitute or poor, and so he's not given the same benefits as someone who is born to living parents. Much like how we see Jane Eyre being treated in society, we see Oliver Twist being treated in society. But Jane Eyre kind of looked at it through rose-colored lens. She was able to grow and develop from the way she was treated. She took those lessons into her heart and became a better person and got a good marriage. Whereas Oliver Twist doesn't do that. That's what I appreciate Charles Dickens for. He takes the issue of poverty and the treatment of those in poverty, and he brings it to the forefront of his stories. Social class and economic class are always a big part of Charles Dickens literature. From The Christmas Carol to Great Expectations, it always deals with the struggle of finding where you belong in society, both as your place socially and your place economically, and how your economics determine your social life. Oliver Twist isn't taken seriously as a human being who is trying his best until he meets a rich friend. Until he has money behind his name, he is seen as nothing but a sneak, a liar, and a thief. The people who are put in charge of helping the poor see the poor as deserving to be where they are because of choices that they had made. And I think it is very clear what Charles Dickens' feelings on that stance is by placing the main character, Oliver Twist, as a young child whose only reason for being in this situation is the fact that he does not have any parents, which is not a fault of his own. So it throws a wrench into the argument that these people deserve what they get. I could go on, but I give Oliver Twist and Charles Dickens in general 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend it. If you can't get into Oliver Twist, I would recommend reading some smaller works by Dickens first. Probably A Christmas Carol is the most approachable, and then moving on into more of his works. They were all serialized, much like Arthur Conan Doyle's Sherlock Holmes, so each chapter is a small segment of the full story, and it's easy to only read one chapter at a time and keep the pace of the story going. That's how it was originally written to be read. So that was a long one. So those are the books that I have read most recently. I'm currently reading Anna Karenina, which you will hear about in the next book update. And let me know what you've been reading down in the comments below. Any recommendations, anything you think I should try. I'm still working on my poster. It'll take a while. And I'll see you guys next time. Bye!